I think it's fair to say, COVID has really leveled the playing field for not only, people, but for companies as well. I think that in itself has really sort of made people quite conscious of what we're doing here within Chip and the wider effect that it has within the market and really just society.
Hello and welcome to Homescreen. I'm Jim Safford and today I'm joined by Joshua Talbot from Chip. Chip is a savings app that's moved over £100 million for its users. So can you tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up doing this particular role at Chip?
Yep, sure. So I've been at Chip now for about 6 months. So I'm still fairly new to the company. I was originally hired as the head of platform. But was then sort of later promoted into VPOE, VP of Engineering in sort of January time. My background is sort of very much engineering centric. I've been involved in tech and business from a very, very young age. Sort of started my first company and sold it before I even left secondary school. From there, went on to sort of help companies with digital transformation, obviously cloud issues as well, ranging from sort of single founder startups right the way through to governments. Large international companies like Shell, Lloyds Bank, Open Banking. So I suppose you could say my background is quite varied. However, the one thing I think I'd stayed the same, regardless of the company, is sort of the passion that I have for helping business through technical solutions, and really sort of addressing whatever concerns they're facing, and to really sort of help embrace opportunities in the market. So I like having sort of exposure to, I guess, both sides of the fence, if you will. Obviously running companies, but also being on the other side of the fence. It allows me just to be, I guess, more creative in my thinking, just to sort of get the best possible results for not only the business, but, the products, really without, hopefully, sacrificing any sort of common concern areas that a lot of startups, certainly chip size, get tripped up on.
Nice. And so what was compelling to you about Chip as a company to get involved with in the beginning?
Yeah, so Chip, I actually worked with the previous sort of VP of engineering at a previous company I'd worked with, and he said, look, I'm looking for a head of platform. Obviously, I know you've worked a lot with that, and I thought, it was a very, very cool company. Obviously, trying to do something fairly new, or back then was fairly new. Yeah. So I said, why not? Took the jump, and here I am at Chip. So it's been a fairly interesting 6 months, to say the least. But I wouldn't have had it any other way. It's absolute cracking company and a really, really good team to be involved with.
That's brilliant. So you said there that you've just recently become the VP of Engineering. What sort of put you there in the first place? How did you kind of develop yourself for that? More short term in the context of what you were doing on the platform side at Chip, and then more generally for a more high profile role like that?
Yeah, so specifically it was because the previous VP of engineering had left the company, and obviously there was a role vacant. I think just given the circumstances, it was a sort of natural step. Yeah. Certainly, given my background, running teams, I've sort of led engineering teams as well in previous startups. Yeah. And a lot of the sort of characteristics that I had in sort of previous companies, were very much true here at Chip. And for me, it isn't so much about titles. It's great, you could be the CEO, VPOE, whatever. But for me, it's really all about getting stuff done. You call me head of cleaning the toilets if you really wanted to. As long as I'm sort of making a difference and, really sort of empowering the teams and the people within it, then, I'm doing my job as far as I'm concerned. And that's the sort of, environment and the sort of culture that we're trying to build within Chip. Very much sort of product driven, entrepreneur, sort of led, team. And I think ultimately, we'll see that in the products as well.
So can you give us the kind of lowdown of what the Chip product does for those that don't already know? Sort of marquee key features and, what do you like particularly about it?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually a Chip user before I even joined Chip. Naturally, it was quite a nice step, obviously, going from using the product to actually working on the product. Yeah. Chip, at the very, very high level, it sort of helps you put money away without you really feeling it. So what it does is you connect your bank account, it analyzes all of your transactions, and then based on that, it sort of figures out using machine learning. We've got models that do that to sort of calculate the best and most accurate sort of saving value for you, as I say, without you really feeling it. So we tend to do saves on a sort of 4-day rolling cycle. We're looking to experiment with that in the sort of coming months as we, we've recently just released Bank Connect, which again, it allows us to sort of, talk with your bank, analyze all those transactions, and to really give you that sort of highly customized save amount.
Yeah, so like the ability to kind of, I guess, make the feature set a little bit more wide. Now, I guess you've been spending a little bit of time in the early days focusing on moving money on stuff like that, but now you just recently got FCA authorization, which I guess will allow you to expand the types of things you can do. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. So, the FCA ball has been rolling, if you will, long before I joined Chip, and as you know, it's a very long process. Sort of allowing us to go out to the market and sort of almost be more selective in the third parties that we integrate with. Before, where we weren't FCA authorized, we were very much sort of reliant on the agent type model, where the third party was the sort of licensed middleman, if you will. That sort of handled the sort of regulatory.
Presumably that also makes a change in the way that you yourselves will handle money. So in the sense of my initial thought was always that Chip was the type of product by which you move money from one place to another in a sort of way as to either lessen the cognitive load on a user or to make that sort of a little bit more manageable from a mental perspective. But now this FCA regulation would seem to have some sort of like leaning towards notions of being either a holder of money, or B, facilitating in some way the packaging up or holding of money and then moving it on. Like, does this allow you to do more interesting things like along the sort of like the savings account sort of line?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things that we've wanted to do ever since day one was to have sort of FSCS accounts, for example. So at the moment, when you put your money into Chip, although it's put away into a sort of ring-fenced Barclays e-wallet, it isn't. It's a different sort of approach to actually having your own savings account, with a third-party bank. So as you're saying, that will allow us to start holding money and start being sort of a provider in facilitating that. So certainly there will be new features coming out in coming months. Or even weeks for that matter, without giving away too much. That will obviously, facilitate that, and obviously the need that our users have. So savings accounts and the like are very much sort of on our radar, and the quicker we can get to them, the better it is for not only us as a company, but more importantly our users.
The fact that you've moved 100 million for users, and that's a big marquee sort of, you can see that on your website, it's massively. It's those sorts of numbers are incredible for any fintech, in terms of thinking about what they're doing. But it doesn't seem like me and some friends were talking about this the other day. But it's sort of a number that's hard to believe when you think of it in the context of a fintech. But this is these are genuinely numbers that are sums of money that you've moved, right?
Correct, absolutely. I think even just us, we see the figure every day almost, on a dashboard of some sort. So you almost become a little bit numb to it. Certainly when you make a point of it like that, it is. It's absolutely huge. I remember the day when we passed that in the office. The environment was, it was infused. It was infectious, and. It's a classic startup, right? But as you're saying, for us to sort of have reached that milestone in itself is such a huge thing for Chip. And it's hopefully, almost a bit of a lighthouse to really, what we're capable of, and what we're going to be doing in the next sort of 6 to 12 months and beyond.
The current climate we live in, obviously, we live now in the age of the virus, and the changes in behavior that seem to be coming about as a result of that. Have you noticed anything in particular in the way that people have been interacting with your product based on their current situations?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's fair to say, COVID has really leveled the playing field for not only, people, but for companies as well. Many of them face themselves in the same boat. Certainly we've seen an increase in people obviously taking up interest in the Chip app. And I think it's sort of really, rung home the reality of, these things. To say, 2 or 3 months ago, we were fairly early on in this, and here we are now, pending recession, some might say, and I think people are realizing, oh, actually, I do need that sort of rainy day fund, and the whole mantra behind Chip is to allow people to save without feeling it, and if we can do that in a way that allows them to put money aside, but allow them to also continue on their sort of day-to-day living, and then it's a benefit for everybody all around, right? And I think just to the sort of wider point of view, not necessarily on the user, but I think certainly in just, I suppose, the approach to the way Chip is going about doing things, we're very cognizant of the need for this now, and we've certainly had a frank conversation with ourselves to really almost realign priorities based on this. Obviously, we're all remote now. We've been remote for about 6 weeks, so about 2 weeks before the government announcement. And that in itself was obviously a very, very big change for the company, not so much the engineers, but it does come with its challenges. And I think that in itself has really sort of made people quite conscious of what we're doing here within Chip and the wider effect that it has within the market and really just society. We can help people save and feel good about it. Great.
Yeah, it must be quite an interesting dynamic for you guys, because on the one hand, people now have more, probably as a result, if they have kept onto their jobs, which if they're lucky enough to do that, then they'll probably have quite a surplus of cash in their account. They're not spending money in the pub, they're not going on the tube or anything like that. A certain type of user, that would be pretty kind of a reality. So they would need to put money aside. The other side of that is that you kind of, I guess, as an economy, you don't want everyone to just hive all of their money away into savings. To avoid credit crunches, we need people to be going out into spending. That's where there sort of needs to be a nuanced sort of viewpoint, whereby it's not just put all of your money in the savings account, but put a section of it away, and then make sure you continue to spend in other areas and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So I guess that's why it's not as simple as just having a savings account and putting money in it. It needs to be more nuanced than that.
Completely agree. Yeah. And, as with everything in life, it's very much a balance, right? You don't chuck all your money in your savings account and then obviously not leave yourself with anything at the end of the week. But I think, certainly with the BankConnect service, which we'll go on to a little bit later, just the pure ability to be able to analyze people's transactions over, week, month, year, whatever it may be, it really gives us that sort of holistic view onto, how much they're really capable of getting. And obviously, case in point with the pandemic and having a little bit more cash, I'm not taking the tube, I'm not going down to the pub as I wish I was, certainly with the weather like this, but the app will take that into account, and it will see that you have a little bit more disposable income, and hopefully increase or decrease your savings amount based on that. And again, it's a balance, right? You don't put all your money in the savings, and hopefully just allowing people to do that sort of bridges that gap. Yeah,
certainly. Cool. Well, I guess we've spoken a lot about the Connect Bank feature, so it might be pertinent to start with it now. So you've mentioned initially that there is this new Connect Bank feature, which will allow, in this instance, a Lloyds Bank to be registered. We're going through the TrueLayer API gateway. So I guess this is the first instance whereby we're going to be able to see one of the particular accounts within a Lloyds account. So yeah, here we are, like the classic account, but I guess there would give you, if you had other accounts with them, there'd be a list of different individual accounts you could look at.
Yeah.
So back into the gateway and then back into, it looks like the REST API for chip.
Yeah. That pops open the app. There we go.
Cool. So
yeah,
really nice gateways there, like really smooth interactions. We've been thinking about this particularly, notions of how to move people between different types of screen and product, like, so it can be quite tricky. What's the initial thought there? Obviously you've got quite automatic responses there in the case of, you do a thing on the TrueLayer app, then it automatically takes you back in. And so
it's a balance again. It is absolutely about the user experience, right? There's a lot of friction, certainly in that onboarding flow.
Yeah.
And we've done quite a bit of sort of A/B testing to an extent, really just to sort of figure out, what is the best way to get a user from sort of A to B in not only the quickest time possible, but in the easiest way. So, when somebody downloads the app, you want them to sort of open it and have a really frictionless experience. It's the first time using it. You want the UX to be really, really good. And that's what we're really focused on. And a lot of what we do with the Bank Connect services we'll discuss is very tightly linked into TrueLayer, purely because of the onboarding gateway and everything else that comes off the back of it. So we can, throughout the onboarding flow, we get responses and callbacks from TrueLayer, which obviously comes back from the bank. And we can surface that in the app. So if for whatever reason, your bank wasn't supported, or it can be connected for whatever reason, we'll surface that back in the app. So you can try again, or you can escalate to live support, or whatever it may be. So I completely agree. That is because it's such a focal point for the app. When a user downloads it, we've spent a lot of time sort of perfecting and really just sort of tweaking to get the most amount of users from the one end of the funnel down to the bottom, quite simply.
Being able to access that like bank account data before, we were talking a little bit earlier about maybe being able to provide a more whole view of a person's sort of financial life by going into this sort of depth. How does this, this new Bank Connect service that you're offering differ from what you were previously doing?
So before, whilst we were generating save amounts, it wasn't necessarily, as sort of specific as it kind of being, really, really tailored to your bank account. So I think from a sort of functionality point of view, Bank Connect's V1 in its sort of current iteration is purely just to be able to reach into those bank accounts and to be able to pull that data out of. And certainly now that we're also FCA authorized, and as you mentioned, opportunities have sort of arisen from that. In the sort of later versions of Bank Connect, so the V2 and going forward, we will start accounting for these things, and again, it will become a bigger sort of pivotal part in really the sort of foundational aspects of the chip app and the way we go about moving money from A to B and things like that.
So have you found actually working with sort of the big banks in this issue? One of the things when we've spoken to people from TrueLayer and other sort of other API platforms, they've said that there have been really good experiences of working with companies that are able to deal with it, but
to an extent, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, obviously we use TrueLayer, an awful lot. It does a lot of the heavy lifting, and we don't really touch too much on the sort of open banking APIs, if you will. Again, that's what TrueLayer does for us. But certainly from the banks in the CMA 9, I know even last week, for example, we had an issue. And it was the sort of back end of the bank. It wasn't, TrueLayer or us. And these things happen, all the time. We see an awful lot of people sort of halfway through the onboarding flow, for example. They come to live chat and, it's either a status code error on the bank side, or an invalid or a whatever issue it is on the TrueLayer side. So it's changing by the day. One day it'll work, one day it won't, and it's just the way it is. And I think until we've got a little bit more rigor and really more sort of standards on how these things should be built, then I think we're going to continue to see these sorts of issues, more so because certainly from the banks I've been in that claim to be open banking, the APIs are completely different from one another, and purely from that aspect alone, just integrating with them ever changing sort of goalposts, makes a developer point of view incredibly tedious and very, very hard to sort of keep on top of. So
yeah,
we're very fortunate that TrueLayer does a fairly good job of that for us, but certainly, the ball does get dropped. And the user does pay the price, unfortunately, in terms of a bad user experience.
So the next journey we're going to take a look at is in the payday put away feature. We've got a bank set up here from Lloyd's. So this is gone using the new sort of Bank Connect feature, the first version of that to have been launched. And then we have some sort of rules based here on how much we want to put away.
Correct.
We can also have some pre-fills here as well, and then we set up. Sorry, what were you going to say there, Joshua?
No, I was going to say that was it. As you said, it was pop in the date and away you go, really.
Yeah. And then we got specificity here on what date in the month we're going to get. I would imagine that's correlated with when we're paid, so we can be a bit more flexible with when that money gets put away. And then this
Correct.
is a sort of like a set direct debit there, where we're thinking there a little bit more about things like how much money do we want to put away, or how much money do we feel we can put away per month. How does that kind of fit within the general context there of Chip as an app that looks into your spending and sees how much you can afford to move? So does that have any bearing on the way that you think about people saying how much they want to put away?
I think immediately no is the short answer. The sort of payday put away, which actually released today, it basically works like a manual save or a normal sort of autosave, except obviously the amount is just what you sort of set. So there isn't too much in the way of being able to sort of take that into account, more so because the Bank Connect feature was sort of developed almost solely with a single purpose, and then from there we can start adding on the sort of use cases, if you will. So certainly I think down the line we'll start to see a sort of natural integration between the two. Immediately there's not really a correlation of any sort. It's just you tell us how much you want to put away on your payday. Payday comes around and then we take the money. And I think some may see this as being sort of specific to a type of person or a type of saver, and I don't necessarily think that is solely or 100% true. Yes, it's sort of built in mind for people that usually have a monthly single payment in the bank account as a salary, but the ability to customize the sort of day when you put away that money gives them the ability for people that are on perhaps bi-weekly or even weekly sort of paychecks to go in week by week and really change that value depending on how much disposable income they have. So again, this could be integrated more tightly into sort of the newer features that we're trying to get on top of the Chip. It's really just for sort of that almost peace of mind, really. You don't have to log into your bank account, send it to an account number and sort code. You tell us when you want it, and we'll take the money and and put it in your account. So it's simple as that, really.
What sort of people do you think would use a service like this? So this is, as you touched there, a little bit more short-term, or people with shorter income cycles might find a particular use case with this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're all about trying to sort of remove the friction out of saving. And if that you're getting a sort of paycheck every 2 weeks or every week or whatever it may be, then at least then we can sort of give you the ability to almost be included in in that sort of demographic that wouldn't perhaps be normally sort of involved. So we're trying not to sort of discriminate who we're building the features for. We want to build the feature for everybody to use, regardless of whatever your income is. And I think, as I say, being able to sort of customize that on a week by week basis, or whatever it may be, depending on your income, sort of caters to that need. And I don't think really sort of isolates any particular sort of demographic, let's say.
Okay. And you, in the terms of like this is as a feature of moving money from one place to another, presumably there is an element whereby chip is holding money in this instance.
Correct.
What happens from that perspective?
Yeah, so as I say, it works like your typical save would. So when you it uses the exact same APIs as if you were to make an autosave,
Okay.
and all it does is it basically just executes it on a certain time and date, as opposed to really anything fancy. I wish I could say there was a more technical solution to it, but it's often the most sort of simple things, fix the biggest issues, and I think it's certainly true in this case.
Okay. And so you're able to then hold that money for a certain period of time within the chips ledger, I'd imagine, or some version of that.
Correct.
How's that work from a banking license perspective?
So it works in the sort of typical way, I guess saves do at the moment is, it just gets bunged into, that sort of fenced off e-wallet, which is FSCS protected, and that's sort of held off with a third party that has the relevant sort of regulatory licenses and whatever it may be. I think the point that is worth stating is that we've got this far basically on being an agent, right? We haven't had FCA authorization until very, very recently. So, third parties like TrueLayer, like the sort of other ones that we use as well, being done so on the sort of premise that we would be an agent and therefore would be using their sort of licenses and such to be able to sort of facilitate in those transactions. So it's good for us sort of from an overhead point of view, because obviously we don't have to sort of worry about those things. But certainly now that we are FCA authorized, as I said earlier in the call, we are starting to sort of think about those things and sort of bring those in house, or perhaps move them to a different provider, based on whatever the need of the company is at that particular time.
Okay. And I guess we touched on this a little bit earlier, but you think about access to people's accounts via TrueLayer and things like that. Do you ever think about payments? Is there anything does Chip have a thought or a mantra around how payments are conducted, how they do it, and that kind of thing?
I mean, obviously we want to do it in the sort of easiest, frictionless way possible. I don't think we have a mantra per se. I think it's a fundamental issue of getting A to B, right? It doesn't need to be necessarily anything fancy. And all the will in the world, I'm sure I'll probably butcher this, and I'll have a horde of devs telling me I'm completely wrong. But I think the flow, for all intents and purposes, is fairly simple in terms of the way it has to go, and compared with perhaps other services that we would leverage in the market. So it's a bit of a grey area for me, I think, is to say, to be frank. I think more on that coming soon. Okay.
So the next section we're going to look at is the Autosave, amend and save streaks features. So we've got this in-house, your home screen is a chat interface essentially. I think it's really cool. Then we've got this sort of like activity transaction feed area, and then we can very quickly adjust a save amount. These are sort of, I guess, like specific event-based savings. So like an automatic save there is changed, and really, really simply as well. But we can also skip that if we want to, and then also see streaks. I think everyone who's ever done a like free coding course or Snapchat or anything like that will know the importance of streaks from a psychological perspective. But yeah, you bake that into the flow there, and there's also this sort of current bonus area at the top, which I'd like to touch on as well. It's a beautifully designed app. Like that's a really stunningly sort of conceived notion of like chat interface as your home, then a ledger-based system, which is kind of quite common. We've seen from a lot, but like taking the best bits of each individual sort of UI components. What's the sort of design practice look like for you guys at Chip?
Firstly, completely agree. Our design team are absolutely phenomenal. The simplicity is always blows me out the water.
Yeah.
But I guess the design process is that, it's a typical design process. You sort of do your wireframes, mock it up, and then you start building it, an MVP, and get some users on it, and sort of build the feedback from there. So we're big believers in sort of dog fooding our own stuff. So pretty much everybody within Chip are obviously Chip users. So typically what happens is we do like an internal release, really just to sort of suss out people's feelings, feedback, things like that. And we feel as if we've got sort of enough of a sort of collection of people within the business to be able to make sort of back of the napkin type sort of guesses on the things that users want. So from there, again, we simplify, more refinement, and we iterate until we get to this point. And to the point about the sort of chat screen and then the ledger, I feel as if it provides a sort of best of both worlds, if you will. It doesn't throw a bunch of information at the user, but equally it doesn't it doesn't sort of hide it behind tabs and buttons and things like that. It's everything that you need. It's very accessible, and going along with the sort of the rest of the sort of thing that we're trying to portray as Chip, is a very sort of seamless and very easy saving experience. And again, the onboarding flow is pivotal in that, absolutely pivotal. So if we can get that right, and we can get all the bits around it right as well, then understandably we'll have a very, very nice onboarding flow.
Yeah, sure. And it's also important to note that chat was like one of the first sort of frontiers for Chip as well, wasn't it? So it's kind of baked into the idea or the heart of the product, right? So it must be an important part of the way that your users actually interact with it.
Yeah, completely agree. As you say, it's been in the app for, I think, as long as the app has been there. I mean, I've only been using Chip for about a year myself, and it's been there as long as that's been there. But I think it's, to your question about how people interact with it, there isn't necessarily a need to sort of interact with anything. They just want the confirmation back that the money has been saved, or it has been put away or withdrawn, or whatever it may be. And I think a lot of our sort of target market is obviously the sort of younger crowd, and being able to appeal to them with the natural things you'd expect, GIFs and everything else, is a natural sort of thing for us to include in there. And then that's why we have, the ledger tabs, as you say, because that then gives the user the ability to actually sort of control the money, themselves, without necessarily, getting anybody else involved. And we think it works quite nicely.
Yeah, completing that within the ledger format as well, like contextually, that's a really neat service. How did you, what sort of was important when you were coming to think about sort of giving people the control over their own sort of savings, like within that ledger? One of the interesting things that I think came out of a conversation I had a few weeks ago with Plum and TrueLayer, they both came on as co-guests, was that they were talking about a variable recurring payments, or sort of like the ability to really vary automatically those sort of savings accounts. Could you foresee a moment whereby Chip would be doing something like that, predictive sort of increases or decrease in the amount saving going on from that sort of thing?
I think so, absolutely. Now that we have sort of greater visibility and a greater, more accurate data set that we can go off of, certainly I think we'll start seeing a lot more, a lot more sort of tech involved in the decision making, and obviously the money handling process, really. So like those companies that you mentioned, they are obviously doing it, but I think the thing for Chip is to really sort of help people put their money away, as opposed to necessarily the amount of money that they want to put away. So before, right now, as we just basically generate an amount, and then we take it from your bank every 4 days. With the Bank Connect service, as we've discussed, it gives us the ability to control that. Next logical step would be to tighten up our sort of machine learning side of things, and start doing more, cooler stuff around that side with the models and the sort of the things that we want to be able to do with your money. So as I say, at the moment we're on a 4-day sort of rolling cycle. What if we change that to 5 days or 3 days or whatever it may be? We really want the ability to almost A/B test with the values for specific users or for a group of users. Really just understand whether or not that's better for them, or again, the more data we have, the better and the more accurate we can become with the values that we sort of generate for the Save user.
Cool. So just to round off before we finish, further plans for 2020. You've talked there quite comprehensively about the notions of like getting the user used to this sort of like notion of taking money from their bank account, and then sort of putting those fundamentals of putting money aside. That's a big priority for now, but then later on in the year, other priorities I'm sure will come about. And then the second question, sort of anything you would think about for anyone who's building sort of tools like this where they're moving money for people. Any advice for those people?
Yeah, don't. Just kidding. I mean, I think obviously given COVID, specifically, it's really sort of changed the way businesses interact and almost transact with each other as well.
Yeah.
So I think certainly with the likes of companies like TrueLayer and obviously open banking as well, as I mentioned, we need to really get tighter on the standards and the way we're building these APIs, so we're not having to sort of go back and forth between almost fixing and iterating on these APIs. I think to your question, to those people developing, really think about your user. They are the lifeblood of the company, as you'd expect, and I think it's quite hard to be a company like Chip, more so now with the, dare I say, in sort of impending recession. I think just sort of almost being a bit of a beacon, a bit of a lighthouse to those people, saying, actually, come put your money with us. We'll look after it, and we'll really help you. When times are getting tough, because when you need that rainy day fund, hey, that's what you have Chip for. And that's sort of 5, 10, whatever it is, every week or every 4 days that you put away, because is slowly accrued, and now you have enough to get you through a month or through whatever situation. So that would be sort of my immediate feedback. But to your wider question as to sort of plans for 2020, for me personally, I think everything's on hold until COVID's over. I think it's safe to say for everybody else, but Chip, I mean, it's full steam ahead, and as we've spoken about in some detail, the FCA authorization as well now gives us the ability to be able to really sort of drill down on that value proposition in the thing that we're really set out to do since day one. And there's a lot of things that we want to do, certainly in the sort of next 6 months, that are worth keeping an eye on. So as much as I would love to talk about it, as things go, you can't, but please, by all means, keep an eye on our social media. And I think sort of, the next 6 months should be fairly interesting for Chip.
Great. Thanks so much for your time, Joshua.
No, thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in. Stop by next week when we're going to be talking to Anson from Up, the Australian neobank. You won't want to miss this one. If you want to see a little bit more about Pulse, head over to pulse.11fs.com. Go to us on Twitter @11fspulse, or give us an email, pulse@11fs.com, to find out a little bit more about what we're up to. We'll see you next week.